The arrival. Elias Carter had grown, used to silence. It spread across his ranch like the morning mist, softening the edges of fences, barns, and fields until the world seemed half asleep. Most days he welcomed it. Silence meant work could be done without fuss. Horses fed, fences mended, fields tilled. Silence meant no memories intruded. Only at night did it turn heavy, reminding him of the woman he had buried 3 winters ago. That morning, silence was broken by wheels crunching the dirt road. A carriage rolled up the path, raising dust that hung in the cool air. Elias set down his tools and watched it approach with a wary eye. Visitors were rare, and rarer still was the sight of Daniel Monroe stepping down from the carriage, boots polished, hat straight, as though he were arriving at a city office rather than a ranch. Behind him, a young woman descended more carefully. She did not glance around or meet Elias's gaze. She carried herself with the practiced restraint of someone who expected little from the world. Elias knew her by reputation alone. Clara Monroe, Daniel's wife. "Carter," Daniel said briskly, striding forward. "We'll need to go over the grazing agreement. I've no time to waste." Elias tipped his hat, calm as stone. "Afternoon. You'll both come inside, then." Daniel launched into business talk before the door had shut behind them. He spread papers across Elias's worn kitchen table, tapping at figures with an impatient finger. Elias answered when needed, but his attention drifted toward Clara. She sat at the edge of her chair, hands folded, eyes lowered. She hadn't spoken a word. "You've got the numbers wrong here," Daniel said sharply. "Adjust them to match the contract." Elias looked at the papers, then at Clara. She seemed small against the wide beams of the kitchen, a figure that might vanish if no one noticed her. On impulse, he said, "Mrs. Monroe, would you care for some water?" "Coffee." She startled slightly, then nodded. "Water, please." Her voice was soft, carrying a tremor that lingered after the words had passed. Elias poured a glass and set it before her. Their hands nearly touched, a brief closeness that drew her eyes up to meet his. For a heartbeat, something unspoken flickered there, surprise, maybe even gratitude, before she lowered her gaze again. Daniel did not notice. He kept talking, kept demanding, kept pointing at numbers until the air itself seemed tight. Elias gave him what answers were required, but each time his gaze slid toward Clara, he found himself wondering. Why did she look so tired? Why did her silence seem heavier than words? When business finally concluded, Daniel gathered his papers without a glance at his wife. "We'll be back in a week," he said. "Have the revisions ready." "Yes, sir," Elias replied, though the words carried no respect. At the door, Clara hesitated. She looked once more at Elias, as though she meant to speak, then pressed her lips shut and followed her husband out. The carriage rolled away, wheels grinding over gravel, leaving Elias once again with silence. But it was no longer the same silence. It carried an echo, the sound of a woman's voice asking for water, the flicker of her eyes when kindness touched her. That night, Elias sat by the fire and thought of her. He told himself it was nothing. She was another man's wife. He had no right to dwell on her weariness, no reason to recall the tremble in her voice. Yet he could not shake the image of her sitting small and unseen beside a man too busy to notice she existed. Miles away, in a house lined with polished wood and cold lamps, Clara sat by her own fire. Daniel had gone to his study, muttering about correspondence. She sat alone, hands folded in her lap, the way she had at Elias's table. But unlike there, no one offered her a glass of water. No one noticed if she was tired. No one cared. She thought of the cowboy who had. The memory was fragile, like a candle flame in a drafty room, but she held it close. For a moment, she let herself feel the warmth of being seen. And when the night stretched long and empty ahead of her, she wondered if it was wrong to hope she might see him again. Temptation in the quiet. The week that followed passed with a strange weight for Elias. Work filled his days as always, mending fences, driving cattle, patching the roof before the autumn rains. But Clara Monroe's quiet eyes kept intruding. He tried to push her from his mind. She was married. He was no thief. Yet memory has a way of slipping into a man's thoughts when his hands are busy, and each time he saw her sitting at his table, hands folded as if afraid to take up space. When the carriage returned, Elias told himself he felt nothing more than mild curiosity. But when Clara stepped down behind her husband, his heart betrayed him, tightening at the sight. Daniel strode ahead, again burdened with papers and figures. Clara lingered, as though reluctant to enter the house. Elias caught the hesitation and held the door for her. "Thank you," she whispered. Her gaze lingered a second longer than before. The business went the same as last time. Daniel spoke, demanded, corrected. Elias answered with the patience of Stonewall. But between the sharp words and numbers, his attention settled on Clara. She glanced at the shelves lined with jars, the sunlight falling through the small kitchen window, the battered chair Elias pulled out for her again. Her eyes softened, as though the simplicity of the room offered more comfort than the polished home she left behind. At one point, Daniel excused himself to check a figure in the carriage. Silence fell. Clara let out a breath, as if she had been holding it for hours. "You work hard here," she said quietly. Elias nodded. "The land doesn't give anything for free. It must be lonely." The words struck him with more force than she likely intended. He studied her face. She was not mocking. She was asking, perhaps even understanding. Sometimes, he admitted, but the quiet can be kind. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "I wouldn't know much about kindness." Before he could ask what she meant, Daniel returned, ending the fragile moment. Yet as the papers were gathered and signatures made, Elias kept turning over her words. The visits became more frequent. Daniel found endless reasons to involve Elias in his dealings, and Clara accompanied him each time. Each meeting followed the same pattern. Daniel barking figures, Clara silent in his shadow, Elias answering with measured calm. But slowly, Clara began speaking when Daniel's back was turned. A question about the horses, a remark about the changing weather, a memory from her childhood, spoken softly, as if unused to being shared. Elias listened. Sometimes he answered, sometimes he simply nodded. Either way, he gave her the one thing she seemed to crave, acknowledgement. One afternoon, Daniel left them alone longer than usual. Clara stood by the window, looking out over the fields where cattle moved like dark brushstrokes against the gold. Her voice trembled when she spoke. "You must think me foolish, talking so much." "Not foolish," Elias said, "just unheard." She turned toward him, eyes bright with a gratitude that unsettled him. He felt it like a rope pulling tight around his chest. He should not feel proud for giving her what her husband would not. He should not feel drawn to the warmth in her voice. Yet he did. The sound of boots outside cut the moment short. Daniel returned, oblivious. Clara stepped back, folding her hands once more. But Elias had seen enough to know her silence was not natural. It was a prison. As the days passed, guilt began to stir in Elias. He told himself he was only offering kindness. But kindness, when offered to someone starved of it, becomes dangerous. He saw it in her eyes each time they lingered too long on his face. He felt it in his chest when her laughter, small, nervous, but real, broke free in his kitchen. The town began to notice. A shopkeeper mentioned in passing that Mrs. Monroe had been seen often at Carter's ranch. Elias brushed it off, but the warning stayed with him. People in small towns keep their eyes open and their tongues sharper still. That evening, Clara returned alone, under the pretense of delivering a note Daniel had forgotten. She looked pale, as though afraid even of being there. Elias took the folded slip of paper, then asked softly, "Did you walk all this way yourself?" She nodded. "I needed the air." Silence stretched between them, heavy and electric. Elias wanted to tell her she should go, that this was dangerous, but the words refused to form. Instead, he asked, "Would you like to rest a moment?" Clara's shoulders sagged. She stepped inside. For a while, they said nothing. She sat at the table, and Elias poured water as he had before. Their hands brushed again as he passed the glass. This time, neither of them pulled away. "Elias," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "when you look at me, I feel like I exist." The words lodged deep in him, stirring something he had long buried. He should not answer, yet he found himself saying, "You do." The clock on the wall ticked too loudly. The air seemed to press down on them, urging them closer, yet both held still, afraid of what the next step might mean. When Clara finally rose to leave, her hand lingered on the back of the chair, as though she wished to stay. She met his eyes one last time before stepping out into the fading light. Elias stood rooted in place long after the door shut, knowing the line between them had grown thin as paper, and it was only a matter of time before it tore. Crossing the line, the storm came without warning. One moment the sky stretched wide and endless. The next it was smothered in gray. Wind swept across Elias Carter's fields, rattling shutters and bending trees low. By dusk, rain poured in steady sheets, drumming the roof of the ranch house like a relentless hand. Elias was securing the barn doors when he heard the faint thud of hooves on wet ground. He turned, startled, to see Clara Monroe dismounting a horse at his gate. Her dress clung damp to her frame, her face pale but determined. "You shouldn't be out in this weather," he said as she stumbled toward him. "I couldn't stay," she replied, breathless. "Daniel left for the city." She broke off, shivering. "I didn't want to be alone." Elias hesitated only a moment before leading her inside. The storm slammed the door behind them. He lit the lantern, its glow spilling across the room, chasing shadows from the corners. Clara stood near the fire, arms wrapped around herself, her eyes darting like a bird caught between escape and longing. "You'll catch your death," Elias murmured, fetching a blanket. He draped it gently over her shoulders, and for an instant his hands lingered. The contact was brief, yet the silence that followed carried the weight of all they had not spoken. Clara sank into the chair by the hearth. The fire painted her face in flickering warmth, softening the lines of weariness. Elias poured her tea, though his hands were unsteady. He told himself he was only offering shelter. Yet the truth pressed heavier with each moment. He wanted her here. For a long time, neither spoke. Rain hammered the windows. The clock ticked. At last, Clara lifted her gaze. "Do you know," she said quietly, "I cannot remember the last time someone touched me kindly." The words cut deeper than Elias expected. He sat across from her, unable to look away. "That's not right," he said. "Every woman deserves gentleness." Her lips trembled. "Not in my house. With Daniel, I am useful, not loved. An accessory, a name on his arm, never a heart to be cared for." Her voice cracked. "Sometimes I think I've forgotten what it feels like." Elias's chest tightened. He should have offered comfort in words alone. He should have reminded her of her vows, reminded himself of his own code. Instead, he leaned forward, speaking low. "You haven't forgotten. You've only been denied." Her eyes widened, glassy with unshed tears. In that instant, the fragile wall between them collapsed. Clara reached across the table, her hand trembling as it touched his. The contact was simple, yet it carried the weight of forbidden years. Elias covered her fingers with his own, rough calluses against delicate skin, and neither pulled away. The storm raged harder outside, as if to warn them. But the louder the wind howled, the quieter the space between them became, until it was filled only with the thrum of their hearts. Clara rose slowly, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. She stepped closer, each pace hesitant yet certain. Elias stood to meet her. For a moment, they simply looked at one another, faces inches apart, breath mingling. "If this is wrong," she whispered, "tell me now." Elias swallowed hard. Every part of him knew it was wrong. Yet the loneliness of his nights, the ache of her silence, the truth in her eyes, they drowned caution. He lifted a hand, brushing damp hair from her cheek, and felt her lean into the touch. "Maybe wrong," he said, "but not cruel." Her lips parted, and he kissed her. The world fell away. There was no storm, no town, no husband, no past, only the desperate tenderness of two souls starved for gentleness. The kiss was not hurried or reckless. It was careful, reverent, as though both feared breaking the fragile gift they had stumbled upon. When at last they drew apart, Clara pressed her forehead to his chest, shuddering. I shouldn't have, she murmured. Elias held her, arms strong yet trembling. Nor I. But I can't regret it. Silence thickened again, heavier now. They both knew the line had been crossed, and there was no stepping back to the safety of distance. Guilt pressed on them, but beneath it lay something fiercer, a longing neither could deny. Clara straightened, eyes glistening. Tomorrow, I will return to him. I will pretend nothing has changed. But tonight, her voice faltered. Tonight, let me remember what it means to be treated gently. Elias's throat tightened. He wanted to refuse, to protect them both from ruin, but her words struck at the core of his grief and his longing. He cupped her face with steady hands, nodding once. Tonight, he said. The storm outside raged on, but inside the ranch house, a different storm had already broken, one that could not be undone. The reckoning. Morning came clear and sharp. The storm swept clean from the sky. Elias Carter stood at his window, watching the wet fields shine beneath the sun. The ranch looked unchanged, yet he felt the weight of what had passed in the night pressing against every beam of the house. Claire was gone. She had left before dawn, slipping away while the fire still smoldered. She had touched his arm lightly as he stirred, whispering that she must return before her absence was noticed. Elias had not tried to stop her. He knew the danger of what they had shared, yet part of him feared the silence that would follow her departure more than he feared scandal. All that day, he worked harder than he needed to, as though labor might scrub away memory. But the echo of her voice lingered. The warmth of her hand refused to fade. By the week's end, rumors had already begun. A ranch hand mentioned seeing Mrs. Monroe's horse near Elias's gate. A neighbor hinted that the Monroe's carriage seemed often directed down Carter's road. In a town so small, whispers grew faster than crops. When Daniel Monroe finally confronted his wife, it was not with rage, but with cold precision. Clara stood in their parlor, back straight, eyes fixed on the floor as he circled her like a man inspecting damaged goods. "You've made yourself the subject of talk," he said flatly. "Do you understand what that means for me?" "For you," Clara repeated, her voice brittle. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Do not mistake me. I'm not jealous. I am embarrassed. People will think I cannot manage my own household." The words, stripped of love, carved something final in Clara's heart. She lifted her gaze for the first time. "Is that all I am to you? A piece of reputation?" Daniel gave a thin smile. What else should a wife be? Clara felt the truth settle like a stone in her chest. Whatever hope she had once carried for her marriage was gone, extinguished without ceremony. That night, while Daniel worked in his study, she packed a small bag. The next morning, she stood again at Elias Carter's door. He opened it slowly, as though he had not allowed himself to dream this might happen. "Clara," he said, voice low. She met his eyes with quiet resolve. "I cannot go back." He stepped aside, letting her into the familiar warmth of the kitchen. She set her bag on the floor and folded her hands, trembling but unyielding. "Daniel does not care for me. Not my heart, not my soul. Only his name. Last night he proved it. And I cannot keep living unseen." Elias closed the door, leaning against it as though to steady himself. His chest ached with both relief and fear. "You know what this means. The town will not forgive. His anger will not rest." "I know," Clara whispered, "but I would rather face anger than emptiness. I would rather face gossip than silence." For a long moment, Elias said nothing. He crossed the room, his boots heavy on the floorboards, and stood before her. He lifted her hand carefully, as though it were something fragile. "You deserve more than whispers and stolen hours," he said. "But are you certain you want to pay the price?" Her eyes shone steady now. "I have already paid enough. With years of my life. With a heart wasted on a man who never wanted it." Elias drew her into his arms, holding her as though anchoring them both. The decision was not easy, nor was the road ahead. But in that embrace, there was no doubt. They had chosen. Outside, the town would talk. Daniel would rage. Doors might close. Friendships might fray. Yet within the ranch house, for the first time in years, both Clara and Elias felt a silence that was not empty but full, filled with the promise of gentleness, of being seen, of a love worth its cost. The fire crackled, The day brightened, and though the future remained uncertain, the choice was made. Claire did not turn back.